Well, good evening. It is such a pleasure to be back home in Indiana. I've missed you guys, so thank you for the warm welcome. It is so critical, young people, that you understand what the basis of our freedoms are of this great country, what the basis of your faith is, and also the support and the foundation from your family. And tonight we're going to talk about all of those things combined. But I just want to encourage all of you to step into your God-given gifts, your God-given talents, develop them and use them for service, use them for good, and make sure that you steward them wisely. This young lady who you're about to hear from tonight is a 12-time All-American swimmer. She has 5 SEC titles as a female swimmer at the University of Kentucky, and she had ambitions to pursue a dental degree, which she started, but God had other plans for her life. That postgraduate ambition and her entire life was changed when she was forced to share a locker room and then compete against a biological male at the 2022 NCAA Women's Swimming Championship. That uneven challenge, not just for Riley, but for every woman competing in the pool that day, was made even more traumatic when the officials insisted on giving that male swimmer the trophy, despite tying Riley down to the 100th of a second in the event. That moment became her call to action, to defend and protect America's daughters against the woke left and the gender-denying ideology. Riley says biological men should not take opportunities for success in sports away from women. Biological men should not share locker rooms with women. I had a chance to actually meet Riley and talk with her a few weeks ago and again this evening. This is what I can tell you about her, and you're going to see it and experience it. Her faith is fierce. Her courage is fire. Her passion is contagious. Her heart is big. Her voice is a force changing the game in this fight to protect women's sports and women's rights in sports. Please welcome to the stage Miss Riley Gaines.
You're so sweet. That was so kind. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you guys. You might be clapping a little too prematurely because I made myself look like an idiot today. And I was calling this beautiful little city that we're in Carmel. Someone came up to me and said, no, you got to say it a lot more country than that. It's just Carmel. So I now know how to say that. But really, what a blessing it is to be here with you guys. Prior to this, I got to spend some time with some of the young girls, a part of the Grit and Grace chapter that's here. And truthfully, it just leaves me feeling so inspired, revitalized. I told them, maybe the objective was for me to inspire them, but it is certainly that inspires me. It reminds me why I fight the fight, why many of us here tonight, why you're here, why you fight the fight. So all that to say, truly could not be more grateful, more blessed, more humbled to be in this room with you guys. I'm very excited. We have a little Q&A portion, which I always enjoy. We'll get to hear from some of you guys if you guys have any questions as well. So I figured leading up to that, I would just give you a little background on me, what qualifies me to be here. I graduated from the University of Kentucky in 2022. I got my degree in human health sciences and health law. I was actually in dental school after college, actually set to specialize in endodontics, which is root canals, weirdly enough. I had married my really cute 6'4" British husband, who now living in Nashville has like this awesome country British accent. It's the best. I'd married him in my senior year of college. It would have been really easy for me, really safe, really secure for me to essentially ride off into the sunset, I guess, with the plans that I had made for me. But I realized that the quickest way to make God laugh in your face is to make plans for yourself. because he very clearly had different plans for me. A little bit about my swimming, my athletic career. Started swimming when I was 4, graduated when I was 22, so dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport, which probably don't have to explain that to too many people in this room. I didn't have to explain it to too many of the girls I talked to earlier, because you get it. You know the time. If you were an athlete yourself, a current or former athlete, a parent of an athlete, you understand the time, the hours, the dedication, the sacrifices that you have to make to compete at and ultimately be successful at the highest level. I was certainly no different. Started, getting recruited in high school. I was one of the nation's top recruits, which, let me just say, this town is, it has a history of successful swimming, so yeah. It's no joke. The amount of top tier athletes, collegiately and far beyond, that have come from right here is unprecedented, that's for sure. But I was one of the nation's top recruits. Really, truthfully, could have gone anywhere in the nation that I wanted to go. I'm biased. I'm sorry. The SEC is, in fact, the best conference. No, don't worry. We're letting everyone in nowadays. Texas, Oklahoma, feel free. There's probably like an application you can do and just join. Maybe we would welcome you with open arms as well. But I knew I was going to stay in the SEC, come from a family of SEC athletes. My dad, he's an SEC Hall of Famer. He played football. My mom, she played softball. My oldest sister went to Ole Miss. She played softball. My brother's in college. He plays football now. My youngest sister, she is 16. She's an elite level gymnast, and dare I say, the best athlete out of all of us, which I would never tell her that. She'll go on to do incredible things. But all of that to say, I knew I was going to stay in the SEC. Maybe you guys will appreciate this being close to Kentucky. I'm a lifelong Tennessean. I thought the only things that came from Kentucky were like meth and Mountain Dew, which was not interested in going to Kentucky. Those things did not interest me. They still don't, mind you. But now I found out they have horses and bourbon, and I do like those things. But I took a trip there, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the team. I fell in love with the coaches, with the campus, the resources that they poured into us, outside of even just athletics, into our academics, into our service, both things that really mattered to me. And so on a whim, I decided to commit there, and truthfully, there could not have been a better place for me. And I very proudly finished my career there as a 12-time NCAA All-American, a 5-time SEC champion, actually the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, making me one of the fastest Americans of all time. Two-time Olympic trial qualifier, SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. The list goes on, but again, just to reiterate it, it really is a lifelong journey. We dealt with COVID, hit the end of my sophomore year, of course, March of 2020. We were robbed of an NCAA championships in that way. We were able to return to campus, start of my junior year. We dealt with the nonsensical, mandates of social distancing and contact tracing and mandatory vaccines and mandatory mask, which how many of you have seen a swimmer in the water wearing a mask? No, but they certainly tried. We essentially waterboarded ourselves every day. But we dealt with that, but I returned my junior year, and this is when I was able to, ultimately, this is when I won my first individual SEC title. This is when University of Kentucky won its first ever SEC title as a team in program history, and I concluded my junior season by placing 7th in the nation in the 200 freestyle, which I was proud of. To be top 8, you're an All-American. It's a pretty high honor, but didn't go my best time. I knew I was capable of more, and so it was really right then and there, placing 7th in the country my junior year, that I set a goal for my senior year to win a national title, which would of course mean becoming the fastest woman in the country in my respective event. And so, senior year rolls around, and I'm really right on pace to achieve this goal. About midway through my senior season, I was ranked 3rd in the nation in the 200 free, trailing the girl in second, a girl I knew very well, by, a few 100ths of a second, a very small margin. But the swimmer who was leading the nation, by body lengths, might I add, was a swimmer that none of us had ever heard of before. And this was the first time we became aware of a swimmer named Leah Thomas. Lots of red flags at the time. Keep in mind, we hadn't, at this point, seen a photo of this person, or else things definitely would have been a little more clear. But for all we knew at the time, this was a senior from University of Pennsylvania, which is not a school that has ever historically produced that caliber of swimmer. Leading the nation again by body lengths in events ranging from the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, all the freestyle events in between through the mile, which is of course long distance. I mean, none of it made sense. I'm scratching my head, I'm looking up the name Leah Thomas. There's no history of this person until that season. We continued to stay in the dark until an article came out disclosing that Leah Thomas is actually Will Thomas, and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch to the women's team. And so, when I read this, naturally I was shocked. My whole team was shocked. But really upon reading it, I just felt this overwhelming sense of relief. Like, duh, that makes sense. He's a man. And it was at this point I went to look up who Will Thomas was. Because again, admittedly, I was curious. Was this a lateral movement? Was this someone who went from ranking amongst the best of the men to now continuing to rank amongst the best of the women? Which is, of course, not what we saw. We saw that this was a mediocre man. It's probably generous, actually. This was a less than average man competing in his rightful category, the men's category, at the Division I level, ranking in the 400s and 500s nationally the year prior, to again now, not just number one, I mean dominating the entire country of women and girls. But again, kind of why I say I felt relieved, because I just naively assumed that the NCAA would see it how I saw it, and how my parents saw it, and how my coaches saw it, and how my teammates saw it, and how anyone with any amount of brain activity would probably comprehend this information. But lo and behold, the NCAA did not. They did not see it that way. They saw absolutely nothing wrong with this. And so about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of 2022, they announced that Thomas's participation in the women's category was a non-negotiable, meaning there was nothing we could do. There were no questions that we could ask. There were no concerns that we could raise. We were quite literally told we had to accept this with a smile on our face. And so that first day was the 500 freestyle, which is not an event that I typically do. And so I watched on the side of the pool as Thomas swam to a national title, beating out Olympians, beating out American record holders. I mean, girls we just saw win Olympic medals. Girls from IU who just won Olympic medals a few months ago in the Olympics. He beat them all by body lengths. He became the first man to win a Division I NCAA women's national title. Trailblazer. The second day of competition was the day that he and I raced. And so, of course, we get on the blocks and we dive off and we swim 8 laps of freestyle, and I touched the wall at the end. And I look up at the scoreboard, and almost impossibly enough, we had gone the exact same time down to the 100th of a second, meaning that we had tied, which, number one, is incredibly embarrassing for a 6'4" man. He couldn't even beat me. But two, it's rare, right? You're racing for about 1 minute and 40-ish seconds, and not even 1/100th of a second separated us, which now looking back, you can't tell me that's not divine intervention. But anyways, we get out of the water and we go behind the awards podium, and the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself, him towering over me, and this official says, "Great job, you two, but you tied, and we don't account for ties. We only have one trophy, and so we're going to give that trophy to Leah. Sorry, Riley, you just don't get one." And let me tell you what, that was really the moment when, I think, that was the pivotal point for me. And so, I asked him the dreaded question no one dared ask all season, at least not out loud, publicly. And I said, why? Why are you adamant on giving this trophy to a man in the women's 200 free? To which he didn't have an answer. They didn't give him a script of what to say when someone asked the dreaded question of why. And so I appreciate his honesty. He looked at me, and understand, this is when his face changed, the official. I could tell he didn't even believe what he was about to say. He looked sad, he sounded sad, and he said, Riley, I'm so sorry, but we have been advised as an organization that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy's in Leah's hands. You can pose with this one, but you have to give yours back. Leah takes the trophy home, you go home empty-handed, end of story. All season, we knew the unfair competition was wrong. We knew the locker room scene was wrong. We knew how our voices were effectively muzzled and stifled. We knew all of that was wrong, but it wasn't until this moment that I think I fully grasped what was happening, because it was very clear to me the principle behind why they did what they did. They reduced everything we'd ever worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a man at the expense of all of ours. That's when I was just no longer willing to wait. And I say wait because that's what I was doing. I was waiting for someone else to say something because I thought someone else would. I thought surely there would be someone within the NCAA, someone with political power, someone's dad, quite frankly, would come down there and yank this man out of our locker rooms like my dad so desperately wanted to do. I just naively believed that someone whose job it was to protect us would protect us. But it was on that podium, standing there holding this trophy I knew I had to give back, sharing my placement with a man who's standing 8-9 inches taller than me, in this realization of, Riley, how in the world can you expect someone to stand up for you if you're not even willing to stand up for you? This has to come from you all as women, as female athletes. So again, that's the unfairness of it, which probably didn't have to go into that much detail of, because kindergartners seem to understand the difference between boys and girls. We have a current president who does not, but kindergartners do. But what you couldn't possibly grasp, I don't believe, unless it's a situation that, again, you yourself or maybe a daughter, a loved one, has been in, is what the locker room was like, which has been, again, brought to the national debate stage just this week, given NCAA President Charlie Baker's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee this week, which we'll get into, and I imagine, in our questions. Don't even get me started on that guy. But you couldn't possibly understand the violation, the humiliation, how awkward, how embarrassing, how uncomfortable it is to be in a locker room, which, let me set the scene. Swimming locker room is not a place of modesty, right? These suits that you're putting on, they're skin tight, they're paper thin. It takes at least 15, 20 minutes to really poke and prod yourself into these suits. That's 15 to 20 minutes of which you're fully exposed. I can't even put it into words. Have my back turned, I'm putting on my suit. The locker room goes dead silent. I think that's weird. I turn around, I look up, because again, I quite literally have to look up because he's towering over every girl, and there's a man standing at 6'4", 22 years old, taking off his women's swimsuit, stripping down to nothing, fully naked, fully intact, fully exposing himself, inches away from where we were simultaneously fully undressed. Again, it was innate for every girl in that changing space to cover themselves, whether it was with their clothes or their hands or their towels, and to get out of the locker room as quickly as they could. And I briefly alluded to the silencing, but again, I think that's an important piece in understanding how this issue has transcended beyond the subject matter here, as a lot of the cultural chaos that's plaguing this nation. And it really has become an infringement on our First Amendment rights. My school sent me to sensitivity training. Didn't really work, but I had to go, where they sat me down. They sat me down, a 21-year-old senior in college at the time. They brought in an outside professional, whatever that means, who quite literally told me and taught me how to use she, her pronouns in a sentence. I had to keep going through this training until they felt like I had verbatim been properly re-educated. I was told, you'll lose all your friends These are friends you've had a lifetime. They won't want to talk to you anymore. You know, Riley, you'll never get a job. Your employer is going to look you up and they're going to see that you're a transphobe if you speak up about this. And you don't want that, do you? You know, you want to go to dental school, Riley? No dental school will ever even look at your application if you speak about this. Remember, you signed that scholarship. And when you did, you gave away your rights to speak in your own personal capacity. Remember who you represent. Remember whose name is across your chest and across your cap, because it's not yours. It's ours. And understand, we have already taken your stance for you. Our university went as far as to tell us that if we did speak out and any harm whatsoever were to come towards Thomas's way, whether that's physical harm, emotional harm, self-inflicted for that matter, they said, then understand that makes you solely responsible. And that makes you responsible for a potential death, and that would make you a murderer. And you don't want to be a murderer, do you? No, so I suggest you be kind, and I suggest you be inclusive. That's what they told us. Let that really sink in. They told us we would have blood on our hands if we advocated for fair play and privacy in areas of undressing. Let's call it what it is. That's emotional blackmail. That's gaslighting to the highest degree, but believe it or not, it's effective. It works when you're talking to a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-old girls, telling them they're going to be murderers. But they knew that. All of this, again, it's a very condensed, short version, believe it or not. But all of that is, I guess, how I found myself here, but far more important than how. And a question I imagine, again, many of you have asked yourself over the past few years is why? Right? Why have we become a society that has embraced this movement to the degree of which we have? Why are we referring to Latino individuals as Latinx? Why are we putting tampons in boys' bathrooms? Why do medical providers and medical professionals suddenly believe that men can become pregnant? All of these nonsensical things. I imagine at some point you've asked yourself why, which I'll just wrap it up here before we start the Q&A portion. As a Christian, I feel entirely confident in answering the question of why, because the Bible tells us why. We're warned actually. Paul warns us, Acts, Romans, different places, Isaiah 5:20, right? We're told we'll reach this time where these spiritual battles will intensify, where darkness will be seen as light, where bitter will be seen as sweet, and where evil will be seen as moral. And it's undeniable that that's not where we're at now. And let me be very clear, because I can already see the headline now. Christian nationalist calls Leah Thomas evil. No, I don't think he's evil. Actually, quite the opposite. But you know what is evil? Deception. Manipulation, that's evil. Lying and affirming something that is neither biblically nor objectively true, that's evil. And who's the father of lies? Who moves through deceit and in darkness? Satan does. So again, I have a lot of theories answering that question of why. From a worldly sense, just understanding, which they don't really teach in school anymore, but understanding Marxist regimes, understanding how the different tactics they use, the propaganda that's being pushed, preying on our most vulnerable, that being women and children, pinning parents and kids against each other. The list goes on. But again, I'm excited to be able to get into this discussion a little further. And so again, this state has, it's been a battle here in this state to pass legislation that ultimately protects women and girls. You have a wonderful Attorney General, actually, who I believe is here. From what I heard, I haven't seen him yet, but Attorney General Rokita. He is really, he's amazing. He is one of 26 Attorney Generals who signed on to a lawsuit ultimately suing the Department of Education and the Biden administration over their illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX, to which at least up until this point has been successful. So we thank you for your leadership. But again, very excited to get into the Q&A portion, and just very grateful for all of you here. I've been in rooms where I'm not well received, so I'm over the moon right now. Let me see here.
told you she was fire, didn't I? Woo! Awesome. Riley, thank you so much. I want to first dive into what this last 24 hours has been, because as I was preparing to catch my flight, I'm watching you on every news program. I'm like, this girl is supposed to be in Indiana tomorrow. I hope she makes her flight. But I want to kind of pick up where the news cycle has left off. Literally today, people were still talking about it this afternoon. The NCAA president, as Riley mentioned, was at a Senate hearing committee, and he was questioned. His name is Charlie Baker. He was questioned about their policy allowing men in women's locker rooms. And Senator Josh Hawley questioned him and asked him about the policy. His response was, our policy doesn't say that. And Senator Hawley says, well, yes, in fact, it does. I have your policy right now. And he proceeded to read from his policy. And it said transgender should be able to use the women's facility if they want to, not taking into account a woman's right or a woman's, I guess, ability to say anything about that, automatically assuming that, well, the women can go find another facility. And the president also said that it's debatable whether a man who's gone through puberty has an advantage over women. So I would just like you, Riley, to share with our audience here your response to that, because you actually, in fact, were strong in your response, and you said his actions are criminal.
Yeah, and I really mean that in every sense of the word. To elaborate, I mean, 5-10 years ago, I don't know what the timeline is, if a man walked into a woman's locker room, exposed himself, that would be classified as like voyeurism or indecent exposure or sexual harassment, and a DA would follow this man into the locker room, put him in handcuffs, and he would go spend time in jail. But now, at the hands of Charlie Baker, not only is this happening, first of all, it's required, and second of all, it's being celebrated. So that's why I use the strong language of describing his actions as criminal. But it all feels very timely, this hearing and being here, of course, at NCAA headquarters. What we've seen over the past 2 years, which at the time, Charlie Baker was not the president. It was Mark Emmert, who publicly released a statement during all of this that said he unequivocally stood in his decision to allow Leah Thomas to swim with the women because it was based in evolving science, whatever that means. And so he says this. Later that year, the NCAA was having a big convention where they were honoring their NCAA Woman of the Year, which is the most prestigious honor for collegiate female athletes. It's something that encompasses, again, not just your athletic achievements, but how you do in the classroom, your service. It represents a very well-rounded individual. Each university gets one nominee across all sports teams. University of Kentucky chose me. I was so honored and just humbled by this until I saw a full list of nominees for NCAA Woman of the Year, to which it was not exclusive to just women. And so I decided I would go to this convention where I knew they were going to be having this big honoree, this big celebration, but I wasn't going in support. I went there. They had a little convention hall where you could buy a booth. Companies, organizations, and pass things, brochures, handouts. I didn't have anything to pass out, but what better way to get in front of all of these athletic directors than to buy a booth and put myself in front of them? And so I decided I would buy a booth. I applied with the name Riley Gaines. Keep in mind I had been outspoken at this point, and they very quickly denied me. Applied again, denied, applied again with an alias, and they were like, of course we'll take your $2,000. So anyways, I got in there, and I'm talking to every single athletic director who walks by. Every single one says, I totally agree with you. You keep going. Even the president, Mark Emmert. And I'm just saying, really prefacing here, showing you how cowardly these people are. Because Mark Emmert, the president at the time, who previously released that statement saying he unequivocally stood by his decision to allow Leah Thomas to swim with the women, he comes up to me and he says, you keep going. You keep fighting. As if he's not the one I'm fighting. So now that leads us today to President Baker. What they have proven themselves to be, the NCAA as a whole really, especially the governing board members and Charlie Baker, are weak-kneed, spineless, morally bankrupt cowards. There was a pretty good exchange. There was a pretty good exchange in this hearing where Senator Kennedy, who has such a way with his words,
It was absolutely amazing in that moment.
he looks at him and he says, "Why don't you go to Amazon, buy a spine, and take a stand?" It was so funny. So,
You bring up an incredible point, and that we started the evening with the word courage, and obviously God has equipped you to be able to step in to this assignment and carry out and be a voice for so many. You have now inspired so many other athletes to step up. There is currently a lawsuit that's underway, Gaines versus the NCAA. Talk about what has happened since you stood up. I remember very early on when you started speaking out about this, you went to a school, I forgot what school it is, but they locked you in a room, and it became a very violent experience. You could have at that point backed down and said this isn't worth it, but talk a little bit about what happened to you internally and personally when you went through that, and what you've seen now in terms of this movement growing.
yeah, well, first of all, very excited about this lawsuit, Gaines versus NCAA. It's myself and 18 other female athletes who have been subjected to this discrimination at the hands of, again, the NCAA, and so excited to continue pursuing that. I imagine, again, I'm not a lawyer, I don't have that legal background, but I imagine that we will be victorious in this endeavor. But yeah, the scenario you described, again, which is truthfully why I'm so grateful in rooms like this. I was in San Francisco, which, like, mistake number one, going to San Francisco. But I was on a college campus, San Francisco State University, and upon delivering my message, a very similar one to what I'm talking about tonight, I was just, I guess, naive to believe that students would come with an open mind and the willingness to have their hearts softened, because they did not. They came with pitchforks and fire. And upon delivering that message, a group of protesters rushed into the back. It was a room similar to this, where there's, of course, a podium at the front. There's seats in the audience. They rush in the door. They turn the lights off, so the room is pitch black, and they ambush me, like fully accosted. I'm being pushed. I'm being shoved. I'm being punched in the face by these men wearing dresses, which, fortunately for me, their punches don't hurt that bad. But nonetheless, these protesters, they ended up holding me for ransom for almost 5 hours, demanding that if I wanted to make it back home to see my family safely again, I had to pay them money. You might be wondering, where were the police? We were in San Francisco, so the police were being held for ransom with me. I'm looking at them, hour 3, hour 4 in this room. Can't you do something? To which they literally said, no. No, we can't. We're not allowed to do anything, because we're not allowed to be seen as anything other than an ally to this community, or else we'll lose our jobs. The dean of students shows up. It's about midnight, the middle of the night, starts negotiating with these students how much I owe each of them to be able to leave. The price they agreed upon was $10 each, which makes me mad, because I think I'm worth more than $10. But eventually I was able to get out of this room. But the next day, and I'm, again, saying this to highlight, one, the direction of which academic institutions have gone. It's not just universities or colleges in San Francisco. This is, unfortunately, look at even St. Mary's here in this state and what they have done to regarding their transgender inclusion policies, which is really female exclusion policies. So mind you, but the next day, the vice president of student affairs at the university sent out a university-wide email to all students, all faculty, all professors, and said, we are so proud of our brave students for handling Riley Gaines in the manner that they did. We know how deeply traumatic her presence is on this campus, and so here are some counseling resources for you all. Take the day off of school. Just know that we see you, we love you, we hear you, and we stand with you. But to answer your question now of why didn't that deter you? Because that really, in that moment, it only reassured me. It reaffirmed me that everything I'm standing for is right from the objective sense, and again, the biblical sense. you don't shoot at targets you don't want to hit. They didn't say anything. In the hours I was locked behind this door with the protesters on the outside, they said nothing that dissuaded from my argument, my stance. It was name calling. It was these petty personal attacks. It was, saying the most obscene, profane, heinous things you could possibly imagine about me and my family and all kinds of that kind of thing, but not one thing that dissuaded from my argument. So it really only encouraged me to speak louder, I'll say.
One of the other beautiful things that's happened is this is bringing parents together, and it's bringing parents together across the aisle, really, from the different political backgrounds, and parents wanting to just simply protect their daughters and protect their children. President-elect Trump has been very vocal on the campaign trail. He was asked this question, and he emphatically has said that men do not belong in women's sports. We understand now, and congratulations, you're going to be part of working with the Trump administration. What is that going to look like?
Yeah, it was pretty comical when he was asked on the campaign trail, what are you going to do about men and women's sports? And he kind of just looks, and he's like, laughs, which is a natural instinct because it's like a South Park episode, the visual of it. And he's like, I'm going to ban it. Like, duh, that's what I'm going to do. And so working with the Trump administration, of course, Congress now, and the Senate to advance legislation that upholds Title IX's original intent. As I described, as to which Attorney General Rokita knows very well, the Biden administration has, it's the most anti-woman, anti-reality pursuit we have seen from this administration thus far in their rewrite of Title IX, abolishing it entirely. So making sure that is upheld. Also working with his team to introduce legislation that codifies and defines words like woman in law. I can't even believe we have to do that, but really shouldn't be too surprised considering we have a sitting Supreme Court justice who also happens to be like a Broadway theater gal now.
We just found that out this week.
Yeah, we did, which it was so funny because she proudly proclaimed that she was the first black female justice to go on Broadway, which is ironic considering now she knows what a woman is. When asked in a Senate hearing, a few years ago, can you define woman? She said, well, no, I'm not a biologist. Guess what? I'm not a veterinarian, but I know what a dog is. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And it's no surprise that this is the same justice who just at the beginning of this month, there was oral arguments heard before the Supreme Court about the unregulated child abuse that is happening both surgically and chemically to children at the hands of medical providers. This is the same Supreme Court justice who said, if we're going to ban these treatments, what's to stop our government from banning interracial marriage? I don't even have words like that. Where did she come to that conclusion from? Who knows? So yeah, working with his team to define these sex-based terms. And also, one more kind of cool thing is the United States is hosting the Olympics in 28 in LA, which we saw what happened at the last Olympics in the sport of women's boxing, where 2 men, plural, were awarded gold medals for punching their female opponents with the intent of knocking them unconscious. Really, again, just horrific things. So working with our government and the IOC to prevent that from happening ever on U.S. soil.
That's good. Well, congratulations again.
Well, thank you.
Something you talked about a little while ago is the emotional manipulation that's happening culturally. And a lot of parents didn't realize prior to COVID that this was creeping into the school system and that young students are being told and being manipulated emotionally to accept things that are counter-biblical. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of feminism? Because there are, and parents, you know this, there are a lot of words that are being used to sound like they are one thing when in fact they're actually something else. And this idea of what feminism is and what it's actually doing is something very different. And we want to make sure that our young ladies understand what true feminism is and what the power of that is. And oftentimes, it's not what someone is trying to make them believe. So can you just address that for our men and for our young ladies and our young men as well?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I never before this would have necessarily considered myself a feminist, because my understanding was that a feminist is someone who believes that men and women are the same. And while I believe we were certainly created equal, we're not the same. We're different, not in a way that makes women inferior to men, but really in this beautiful way, by God's design, that complement one another. So I never would have necessarily considered myself a feminist, but now having the insight that I do and understanding the root of this problem, I think it's due time we proudly reclaim that word, because what the feminist movement, you picture the women who are burning their bras and those who at one point truthfully advocated for Title IX, they are the ones at the forefront of abolishing sex separation, single-sex spaces in every aspect, not just in sports or changing rooms or locker rooms, but prisons and sororities and all of these intimate and vulnerable spaces. You think of groups like NOW, right? The National Organization of Women. In a hearing that I was a part of a few months ago, the president of the National Women's Law Center, actually, who has tried to intervene in our lawsuit on the side of the NCAA, weirdly enough, the president, who I was sat next to, said that I should have just learned how to lose more gracefully to men, and described herself as a feminist. I'm like, you are just not a feminist. This is deeply regressive, and it's utterly misogynistic, the words that are coming out of your mouth. And my logic in saying it's misogynistic, another hearing that I was a part of, I was sat there, and the representative, she's a Democrat from Pennsylvania, Representative Lee, she begins to read her opening monologue to the hearing, and the first words that come out of her mouth, she says, "I can't believe that I'm forced to sit here and listen to this transphobic bigotry." And it broke my heart. Again, this is a sitting member of Congress who again, resorts to name calling. And so it's my turn to read my testimony, and I read it, and I conclude it, and I put my paper down, and I didn't even mean to say this last sentence. It accidentally just came out of my mouth, but I looked at her, and I said, "Representative Lee, if my testimony you just heard, if that makes me transphobic, then understand by your own logic, your opening monologue makes you a misogynist," which sent the hearing into a tailspin. It was as if she had never had her own intersectional language used against her. Her staff is running over, her counsel's running over, they're pulling up their phones. I literally think they looked up the definition, because about 60 seconds later, she raises her hand and she says, "I want her words removed from the record on the grounds of engaging in personalities," which Marjorie Taylor Greene was in that hearing, and so she buzzes in and she says, "I would call a man posing as a woman someone who's engaging in personalities." But my logic in saying that is, why is it that being pro-woman, which is the stance that I have taken, why is that immediately deemed anti-trans? And okay, if that's the case, then wouldn't being pro-trans inherently be anti-woman? And what do we call someone who's anti-woman? We call them a misogynist. So the feminist movement has ultimately, the traditional feminist movement has ultimately put women back at least 50 years in time. And it's totally emasculated men in the process as well. You think of the my body, my choice, no uterus, no opinion. We told men, and I say we lightly because, again, I don't include myself in this because I see the value. But we've told men, we don't need you. This is a woman's issue. And so now I truly believe there are many men watching this who know it's wrong, who believe it's wrong, but they say it's not my issue. This is a woman's issue to fix. To really truly win this battle, it's going to take every single one of us. Woman, man, old, young, black, white, gay, straight, doesn't matter.
I want to segue kind of into that. We have a lot of young people here who are at a lot of these institutions. We have a lot of young athletes here. What would you tell young women and young men about standing up for themselves if they are faced with something like this?
One thing I told a few of the girls before this is to, number one, first and foremost, always is to trust God. Trust is calling for you, right? This is, again, never a position I saw myself. I never felt prepared for this. I never took a government course at any point in my high school or college time, which is incredibly concerning if you really think about it. I knew nothing about our government. I knew we had 3 branches. Didn't know what they did. I still don't know what they do. I don't even think they know what they do, to be honest with you. My public speaking courses in college, I mean, my face turned the color of a tomato. By no means did I feel prepared for this, but I was so wrong in assuming that that's how God works, that He calls those who are already prepared. It's actually quite the contrary. He prepares those who He calls. And if He brings you to something, He will certainly bring you through it. Just like He did with Moses, who led the Israelites out with Aaron and his staff, and just like He did with Joshua, who He promised a victory over the Canaanites, and just like He did with Esther before she was brought before the king. And so, which I guess is another important point. We think of Esther 4:14. It's a verse that, at least the back half of the verse, it's commonly used today, right, for such a time as this. But remember the front part of the verse, and this applies to every young girl in the audience. It says, "For if you remain silent, you and your father's family will perish." That applies to all of us, right? We were not saved to be silent. So my message to young people is to be bold, be courageous. Know that especially on this topic and many topics like this, as it pertains to the indoctrination, the grooming, and the DEI, and all of this stuff, the majority of people agree with you. It might not seem like it, because those who are pushing this have the authoritative position, but what was made very clear on November 5th is that the majority of the country agrees with you and is behind you.
I have one more question for you, and then if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask Riley, if you could just come here to the front, and then I can hand you the mic while she's answering this last question. But I want you to address our parents, because there have been a few parents that I've talked to tonight who are noticing some of this creeping into our schools, even at the younger ages, which is very alarming. So I'd like you just to talk to our parents. What can our parents do when they're seeing this creeping into their schools, and especially on the local level? Besides getting involved personally, but how do parents respond?
Well, first of all, be proactive rather than reactive. So often I hear from girls who have been impacted by this movement who say that I never thought it could happen to me. Yeah, none of us did. 5 years ago, I mean, this was kind of an unimaginable situation or scenario for any girl, any woman, any person really to have to go through. So be proactive. I think there's a lot of fingers to point, truthfully. You can point a finger at the NCAA, you can point a finger at the Biden administration, you can point a finger at the IOC. It's a big finger-pointing competition, but I truly believe there's a finger to be pointed back at the parents. Parents, defend your kids. I have parents who reach out to me every single day who say, this is happening to my daughter, but I work a corporate job, so I can't say anything. Can you help her? Which, of course, it's my mission. I've made it my mission. I will do anything I can, but do I have to care more about your kids than you do? You know, at what point do you draw that line? So defend your kids, defend your daughters. That being said, again, so much of this conversation is centered around girls and women, but it does affect men. And so parents, teach your sons how to be strong men. Teach them how to fulfill their biblical role of protecting and providing. I believe that's a large part of why we are a nation in decline, is because we are a nation that is led and governed by weak men. Of course, there's the saying, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. It's a process that repeats itself, and there's no doubt in my mind which part of the process we're in now, where weak men have created hard times. We can only hope that these hard times garner strong men again, but parents, you have the ability to expedite this process by teaching that to your sons. So that's some encouragement.
Again, if you have a question, please make your way to the side of the stage here. Thanks.
Stand away from the speakers.
Yes.
Riley, thanks so much for being here, and welcome to Carmel. We're very grateful. Hey, this might be framed a little bit as maybe a negative question, but has Will ever reached out to you on the back end? Has there been a reconciliation, conversation, threats? What's the back end of that story look like? Have you been in contact with anything like that?
Yeah, no. So he, after this meet, of course, I actually reached out to further. This was pretty close to its inception, and I still felt like I had to be apologetic. I felt like I had to apologize for this stand that I've taken, and so I wanted to just reach out and explain where I was coming from and why we as women felt violated, but to which there's ultimately been no response. So he's in law school now, which why would he not become a lawyer? So he's doing that. He actually ended up suing so World Aquatics, FINA, which is the international governing body of swimming, they created a policy, really the first ones to prioritize fairness over inclusion. It wasn't a perfect policy, but it said if you've gone through male puberty, you can't compete with women, which ultimately prevented him from taking a women's spot at the Olympics this last go-around, to which he decided to sue. They even created a third category for him to be able to compete, to which he basically responded by saying, if I can't trample on women in the process, I don't want to compete at all. But of course he lost this lawsuit. So I tried to refrain from making too many comments about him personally, given, as a Christian, I don't support transitioning at any age for that matter, but that's the beauty of America, is we have the ability to live our lives in the way that we want to. That's one of the things that makes America so great. So what he does behind closed doors, isn't necessarily of my concern, but what I will say about him, which I feel entirely confident in saying, is he is a total narcissist who displayed an utter disregard for every woman at that meet, as long as it made him happy. Again, I believe it's sad. I pray for him. Me and my husband pray for him. We pray that he sees God's grace and understands that no one is too far gone, including him. So
That's beautiful. Other questions?
Hi Riley, it's nice to see you again. Thank you again for taking a picture with me early on and signing my book. My question to you, I know that you had mentioned that you are currently working with the incoming Trump administration. And my question to you is, do you think with the Trump administration, and they're working on, basically going back to the drawing table of defining what a woman is, do you think more parents, more people are going to be more emboldened to speak up? And also, with that being said, with the numbers that they are speaking up in tropes, do you think that cancel culture will end up dying by the end of the next 4 years, by the end of President Trump's term?
you know what? There's a couple things that lead me to believe that cancel culture is fading. Number one, the first thing that comes to my mind is this silly little Trump dance that's has become this viral phenomenon, this viral sensation. When I first saw it, I thought, what a silly thing to do for a college football player or, a professional football player for that matter, to do in the end zone. I kind of just initially took this as someone who was supporting Trump, which was great. But when I really thought about it, maybe in theory this dance seems silly, but in reality, this little dance means everything. I think it's a representation of patriotism. I think it's a representation of free speech again. I think it shows us that cancel culture is fading. We saw a big win this week I call it a big win. It's really not a big win. It's common sense, where Disney had a new film coming out, to which they had a big portion in there about the gender ideology movement, and they decided to ultimately take that away. We've seen companies like John Deere, Harley Davidson, Walmart, Tractor Supply, the list goes on, who have ultimately reversed course and rolled back their DEI initiatives and programs. So I believe, one, that the free market always prevails, and what the free market has shown us, again, on November 5th, but also you look at Bud Light, who lost essentially $27 billion overnight. Their next commercial was a big burly man on a motorcycle with the camo can, okay? So the free market always prevails, number one. The people have spoken, the people want Donald Trump. And secondly, courage begets courage. And one person being willing to speak out, and it's kind of like the emperor wears no clothes parable, one person being willing to say, hey, look, that's a naked man, no pun intended, more and more people will be as well. So I believe cancel culture is on its way out, hopefully. Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Now is your chance. Was that you waving, Bernie? You have a question? Oh, okay.
It's not really a question, but I know my wife is rolling her eyes. I just want to say that a lot of people did stand for you, even when you didn't feel stood for, because every time I saw you or the situation going on TV, we were standing up, and a lot of other people were, and I appreciate you. And I think you're amazing. I think your husband's amazing, and your family is amazing for supporting you. I just wanted to note that.
No, absolutely.
You are appreciated.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Much deserved, my friend, much deserved. I want to, speaking of your husband, there's another fight that you have been dropped into right now. I don't know if a lot of people know, it's kind of just now getting a little bit more conversation around it, but your husband is in the process of immigrating and getting his citizenship here in the United States, but he has hit a wall, and I'm just going to kind of give the overall. They were trying to make him take the vaccine when other people who come to the country illegally are not being forced to take the vaccine. So can you kind of update us on where that is and where you guys plan to take that fight?
Yes. So my husband and I have been married for coming up on 3 years now. We got married in my senior year, which was the greatest thing ever. So any young people, I'm the biggest proponent of getting married young. So we've been married almost 3 years. Like I said, he's from England. He came here for college. He also swam at the University of Kentucky. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting to hear from USCIS, or Immigration Services. Of course, there's typically a process. We've had to get an immigration lawyer, which is standard. There's been so much in application fees and processing fees and all of the things. And we've been waiting months to hear from USCIS. Crickets, until finally, years later at this point, we got a letter in the mail, and it was a request for evidence. And so I open it, what evidence do they need? I'm reading it, and it says that my husband didn't have a completed vaccination record. I'm like, what vaccine did he not have? That would be the COVID vaccine, it shows you how, again, nonsensical and corrupt our immigration system has become. Not just in terms of national security, but how hard they have made it for hardworking, tax-paying people who love America, people who want to vote for Donald Trump, quite frankly. How hard they have made it for people like my husband, as opposed to if you were to just fly to Mexico, walk across the border, you're given a driver's license, you're given housing, you're given money. But no, for the people who do it the right way, they've made it virtually impossible unless they're willing to compromise their health and their immune system. It's totally bizarre, and so Elon Musk has been helping on this front, of course, as an immigrant himself who sees the value and loves America. I believe he's done more to save free speech, number one, than anyone else in this country, at least in modern history. And so very thankful for him, but it's just another battle that we've been in. And so Louis, which is like a total British name, he had his first Fox hit this week, and he did a very good job.
He did a great job. Well, we will continue to pray for you in that fight. It's very interesting when we talk about how things are playing out, and I just want parents, you to know, a lot of these DEI policies that have crept into the schools, even into our companies, President-elect Trump has said that those policies and those programs are going to be dismantled and defunded. So I just want you to know that. So that you are armed with that information if you see it crop up. And we will probably be finding out what steps need to be taken to alert people about that. But they're going to be taking a hard stance on making sure our children are not misinformed about what the truth is when it comes to those issues. Before we wrap, I just wanted, Riley, for you to just give people an idea of how they can contact your organization if they need to, what parents need to do, and what your message is in terms of what you have planned next.
Absolutely. So you can follow me on X or Twitter. That's Riley_Gaines_. Always find myself getting into these like heated debates with like Mark Cuban or Keith Olbermann, which that guy sucks. Or,
which has been the most heated debate you've had? Which has been the most?
I had one last week with Jamel Hill, actually surrounding Caitlin Clark and the controversy there, which I will say I'm the biggest Caitlin Clark fan. I love her. She's amazing. Yes. Her comments surrounding being the Time Athlete of the Year and basically apologizing for her white privilege is, I just believe, silly. Again, I don't necessarily, it doesn't make me like her any less. I'm not that kind of person, but I just think it's silly to say that white privilege exists in professional basketball. I think that's silly. And so me and professional race baiter Jamel Hill got into a pretty heated argument on there, to which she told me I should thank Leah Thomas. I said the only thing I should give Leah Thomas is I think a swift kick and somewhere where it probably wouldn't feel very good. I don't think I owe him anything. So anyways, you can follow me on X or the RileyGainesCenter.org if you have any questions or inquiries about a situation that's happening to you or someone else you know or love. It's again just become a mission of mine to help amplify these stories, provide resources and guidance and the ability to stand firm for yourself and for those around you. So again, that's RileyGainesCenter.org.
Thank you, Riley. Let's give her another round of applause.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you. You're the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.